You're looking now at a demonstration of the process of hydrofracking. Now, trust me, if you haven't heard of it, you're gonna, and you're gonna hear a lot more in the coming months. This April, a hydrofracking operation near Allentown, PA, it exploded, spewing thousands of gallons of chemically laced water into nearby waterways and fields. Although the Cuomo administration has been a forceful opponent of Indian Point and nuclear power, it has been more tepid on other potentially dangerous energy extraction technique like the one we just showed you. In fact, it's rumored that the governor will lift the state's ban on hydrofracking following a report that came out today from the Department of Environmental Conservation. Now, it recommends the practice be permitted except in sensitive areas, more specifically watersheds near Syracuse and also in New York City. Is the governor trying to replace a dangerous energy source with a controversial alternative? Kim, Andrew, you both covered this issue. I mean, you spoke to, I know Congressman Maurice Hinchey up in the Hudson Valley has been a vocal opponent of this here, but it seems the governor's pretty determined. He wants to do this.
Right, and quite frankly, it surprises me because how can you be on one side of Indian Point and then the other side of this environmental issue? But the thing I want to bring up is that so many people are up in arms and very scared that this ban is going to be lifted. And I've had many calls into the DEC in the long time that I've been covering this. And the moratorium that Governor David Paterson put in place wasn't really a moratorium because it required such a long environmental review. So that process still has to go through. Then they have to look at the legality of that. And then there's a 30-day public review period. So the DEC says, hold on. For all the people who don't want this, isn't going to happen until late fall or early winter. The other big,
I've got a couple of big problems with hydrofracking, but the first is an enormous money imbalance. There's a huge amount of financial pressure on politicians and governments to approve hydrofracking. The hydrofracking industry essentially just about owns the governor of Pennsylvania and put him in office.
Right, and it just so happens those are mostly poor areas where this is going on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And let's not forget that the process that we were showing shows chemicals being pumped into that area in the ground to get the gas out. Nobody knows what those chemicals are because thanks in large part to Dick Cheney and his energy task force, they don't have to tell us. So there's really nobody minding the store on this to find out what the damage is and to find out what kind of
It gets worse because the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, is now looking at the hydrofracking companies for failure to make adequate disclosures about things like the kind of things they're injecting into the ground, what their success rates are, and even how much energy you get back.
So why did Cuomo do it?
Well, I think he's going to say, and I think he's earned the ability to say this, that the science is different. He's going to say that the science that they've come up with as they've looked at this shows that the dangers are, let's say, much more limited than the dangers of nuclear power. That argument he's entitled to make, and we ought to judge it for the science that's behind it.
Isn't there another argument that says, show me a better way? We all agree, or many agree here, that nuclear power carries inherent risks that outweigh rewards. This way, he says, is better than that alternative and makes us less energy dependent on others.
We don't know that this is necessarily going to happen. It could.
And by the way, it will bring a lot of money to New York.
It could be that Cuomo just put this out there to see what the polls are going to be and see what people think about this.
Well,
I sense it's a little bit more than that.
Go careful because there's a difference between the two things. Indian Point is an electricity generating facility. Fracking only develops natural gas, which is then put into a pipeline and used somewhere. If you then take that to the next step, which is, well, can we substitute natural gas for nuclear power even on site at Indian Point, you can start seeing the issues converge, but they're not exactly parallel. And Cuomo's public health and safety argument about Indian Point is not necessarily undermined or even advanced by his gas production position on fracking.
You know, Andrew, it's not just that there's a bunch of quacks here who say that there's logic to hydrofracking. They also say, and I understand the science premature at this point, but there's a lot of precautions that can be put in place to not only mitigate it, but far improve some of the earlier problems like we saw in Pennsylvania.
Right. I mean, that hasn't happened anywhere because all of the states where fracking is allowed have had these very loose regulations. It's entirely possible that if New York allows it and they regulate it well and they monitor it well and they take environmental precautions, that it can be done. I'll keep my fingers crossed and say safely, but certainly safer than it's being done in other places. It's also possible that that starts a wave that leads to disclosure and greater safety in other states. And so
what's happening is this is getting forced into the public consciousness.
It
Energy
should be.
policy has been
dangerous.
remote. And Indian Point, fracking, the stuff Kim talked about in her piece, that kind of thing is now taking this, and RNN's in the lead, and I'm glad to be here to say it, in forcing this into the public debate, and that's all
Stay
really
with
good.
me. Wait till you see this next story, Richard, here, because this one you know all too well, and I think for a lot of our public, they got an inside peek into a world they didn't know. We're talking about a hidden religious community just 30 miles north of Manhattan. Unspeakable crime happened there, and now a lot more questions are being asked as well. Stay with us. Another RFL exclusive after this.